From the Zimmerman Symphony Center in Canton, Ohio, this is Orchestrating Change. I'm Matthew Jenkins Yarashevitz, Associate Conductor of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
And I'm Rachel Hegemeyer, Manager of Education and Community Engagement.
Welcome to our podcast, and thank you for joining us.
This podcast will navigate the problems that exist in the field of classical music and the world at large. We invite you to listen with open ears as our guests share their experiences as underrepresented professionals in the music industry.
Our guest today is world-renowned pianist Sara Beuchner. She made her debut as a guest soloist with the Canton Symphony Orchestra in 1994 when she performed Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. She has subsequently performed Mozart's 24th Piano Concerto in 2012 and Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini in 2016. She has also appeared as a guest soloist with the New York Philharmonic, Philadelphia Orchestra, and San Francisco Symphony, among many others. She was a bronze medalist at the 1984 Tchaikovsky competition and is currently on the faculty at Temple University in Philadelphia, where she makes her home. Sara Beuchner, welcome to Orchestrating Change.
My goodness, what an intro. I feel like cheering. That's fantastic.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. We're so
wonderful intro. I want to add, by the way, in addition to those concerts in Canton, that I fondly recall my very first concert with Gerhard Zimmermann was in the summer of 1978 when I was still a student at the Juilliard School. And he came to Juilliard and he auditioned some student performers for a summer series. He was a guest conductor of the St. Louis Symphony, their pop series. And he engaged me to play the completely unknown and somewhat decently forgotten piano concerto of Adolf von Henselt, who was a contemporary of Chopin, a very difficult piano concerto. But I always fondly recall that time many years ago when I was a bit younger. Gerhard had a fabulous mustache and he was young. And that's when we first met.
Oh wow, that's wonderful! Thank you so much for being here. Like we said, we're so excited to speak with you today, and I think we just wanted to start off with a conversation about what led you, or what made you want to become a pianist and then a performer subsequently after that.
That's the kind of thing people ask, and you really can't answer it because it's exactly the opposite. You don't choose music; music chooses you. So when I was 3-4 years old, extremely young, I was caught. My mother saw me walking to the radio in our living room every afternoon at 4:30, and I was glued to the opening music, which was Mozart's Overture to the Marriage of Figaro, that started the classical program at that hour. You know, just kind of got me very, very buzzed every day when I did that. So my brother was already starting some piano lessons. He's a bit older than me. And she asked the teacher to teach me. She said, no, I was too young. But at some point, my mother, who's a tiger mom, just pushed me. And Miss Wolf, my first teacher, picked me up by the hands, she told me many years later, dumped me in her lap, sat me at the piano, and I could play all of my brother's pieces. I knew them all very, very well. And then other things, I could read the music without any instruction, which is pretty rare. It's kind of innate kind of talent. And then she asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I told her I wanted to be a piano player and a pig farmer. I feel fortunate that the first has come true, and there's still enough time. I think I can make it in the second. I've got to study up on my swine flus and various other things. But for some reason, I just love pigs. I still love them. I don't know. It's a flip side of my personality. But
I love it.
Before I die, I do absolutely want to give a piano recital in a hog farm somewhere for
amazing
swine. I'm not sure what I'd play for that occasion, but I'm sure they would like it.
Yes, we should arrange something.
Yeah.
I love that.
So you knew all along from a young age you wanted to be a professional pianist.
Yes, that was just innate, and my mom was very concerned. My parents were kind of poor, and my brother and I were raised in an atmosphere where my mother especially wanted us to have more learning and cultural exposure and so forth. So we had reproductions of great artworks that were borrowed from the library. We had paperbacks of classic books and so forth. And she took us to concerts, quite a few concerts when I was young. And I just loved it. Especially she got me into the Baltimore Symphony when I was like 3 and 4 years old, and I was just mesmerized. I mean, the sound and the look of all that. And I remember the first time I begged her to take me backstage, and she did, because there had been a piano concerto, and I think it was Byron Janis, who I later studied with many years later. But I didn't want to meet the pianist. I wanted to meet the guy who was hitting the timpani so fast. Very exciting, and I got to meet him. I was very excited about that.
Amazing. That's
Wonderful. So a big part of the reason, of course, that we are having you as our guest today is you are a transgender woman in the field of classical music, and very open and proud of that. So tell us from the beginning, tell us a little bit about your journey as a transgender woman, from the time you began to realize that your biological sex didn't align with your gender identity through when you actually transitioned.
I'm so happy that I've lived into an era where, you're asking me that kind of question, and discussing it is not some sort of big shocking thing or whatever, because it's my experience with that aspect of my life and personality has very much mirrored the changes in the United States of America since I was a child. And it has a lot of parallels also growing up in the Baltimore suburbs, which were then all white and are now all black, with what I saw racially as a kid, how I saw integration and how it started, and the various really problems and ugly stories that I witnessed from a close place. Was very, very surprising to me. Kids know who they are, and I knew that I was a girl when I was very, very young, and this caused really not much of an issue when I was young, before I went to school, other than times when my mother would take me to the art museum and I'd point to a beautiful portrait of an elegant Elizabethan lady and say, "Mom, I want to look like that when I grow up." And she'd say, "Huh?" It would really sort of blow her mind. But people just sort of ignored that sort of thing. And I quickly learned when I did go to school that these kind of issues were just shuffled under the table. And children are not as dumb or naive, I think, as adults really realize. In fifth grade, we had a gentleman teacher who was gay, and we never discussed that. It was just known. It was sort of, Mr. Naaman was funny, and that was the word that was used in the 1960s for people like that. So-and-so was funny. If you turn on the old game shows, you might see Charles Nelson Riley or Paul Lynde, and they were entertainers, or Liberace. They were funny. That was the code word for it. They don't really quite fit in. But being transgender was something that was just zero discussed, and even as a child, I remember thinking there was this gender wall that I got higher and higher the older I got in grade school, and I thought, I can never jump that wall. It was very strange to me. I identified with female friends and female this and female that, but I would say one of the worst experiences that brought that all together for me was around third grade or so. My grandmother knew well that I just adored Mozart, and she sewed me a purple velvet Mozart coat and a ruffled sort of blouse to go with it. And I wore this on Easter Sunday, and that was sort of okay, I guess. Anyway, one morning I dressed myself for grade school, and I put that on because I loved wearing it so much. And I went to school, and I promptly got beaten up, and there's some dried blood on that shirt now. I've kept it all these years. And when I got home, the principal called my mother, and of course he was furious at her. And he said, "You never allow your child to wear the wrong sex clothes ever again, or it can't come back." It's like I was to blame for the whole thing. So this was the atmosphere in which I would say GLBT folks grew up in that time. In my teens, I remember there was a very big story about Renee Richards, the transgender tennis player, and I remember reading that story, and it kind of alerted my eyes for the first time that there were people who did that. But basically, building a career in music is such a very hard thing. And in my 20s and into my early 30s, I had a public persona as David Buechner, and I was terrified to come out of the closet. I couldn't really imagine it. I couldn't envision it. I think it was the rise of the internet, home computers, and I started to discover chat rooms and more information that allowed me to embrace myself as who I am and not be so terrified. one of the biggest blocks to all LGBT folks, coming out and dealing with things is lack of access to information and education. And there was a total lack of that when I was a child. It just was not discussed at all. So, if you think that you're the only person in the room that feels like that, you assume, as I did, that there was something wrong with me. I mean, I was sent to psychiatrists and therapists, and all with their reasons for why I felt that way and what was the problem, and trying to correct me and fix this and fix that. This kind of what do they call it? Reparative therapy, or God knows whatever. I mean, I feel like it's a miracle I didn't get subjected to electroshock therapy or a lobotomy or something. My God, these things happened in the 1930s and 40s.
Right.
So anyway, in any case, in my mid-30s, I transitioned, and it cost me professionally quite heavily. I lost a lot of friends, a lot of support, because, these days I think transgender is a word that people know and deal with, hopefully in a happy way, but there are people who don't deal with it in a happy way, but they can't really ignore it anymore. But at the time I transitioned, I was, I guess, the first person really in classical music who had ever done that. And I still remain pretty much the only well-known classical musician who's done that. I have actually met younger trans musicians and composers and performers and so forth. And we're just going to see more of us coming up in the years ahead, of course. So I feel happy and honored to have lived into an age where, I guess, rather than being ashamed and shocked and afraid and embarrassed and run off to Romania, as one friend suggested I do, ex-friend, I should say. He said, well, you better go to Romania and, start a new life, Of all the countries, not France, not, something like Mauritania, perhaps, the Maldive Islands, but Romania. I feel happy to have lived in an era where I am in some ways a role model, and that I can speak to younger people about their own difficulties or conflicts coming of age as LGBT folks. I do mentoring work for both the Juilliard School and the Royal Academy in London, thanks to Zoom, with young people who are looking for support and role models and chat and so forth. And if you had told me 20 years ago I'd be doing that, I would never have believed it. So I'm very happy that the world has changed in important ways that way.
Right. Does it feel like, when you were younger, before you transitioned, do you feel like your gender dysphoria and the way you felt about yourself affected you as a musician mentally? Do you feel like that was any part of maybe what pushed you so hard to transition?
Yeah, for sure. I have always felt my whole life that my music was a mirror of my soul and my spirit. When I play, who I am and how I feel is what comes out through my fingers into the piano. And in my 30s was when I felt increasingly unable to connect those two. Actually, ironically, as I was playing more concerts, the more I felt like it was like play acting. I wasn't really being myself on stage. I was acting a role. I would put on the concert tails and go and do my job. And when music becomes a job instead of a passion, it's all wrong. It's not good at all. And surprisingly, I would say that the couple of years right after my transition, when work just pretty much dried up, was probably a good thing that would happen for me, because I had to spend many hours at the piano just embracing myself and learning to trust, okay, here's this emerging new body and new person, and is making sure it was genuine all over again. It was sort of like playing from the gut all over again, which I really needed to do. Yeah, I think almost any musician will tell you that when the music is hard to play, it means there's something going on. And there were several points in my life when that happened. In my youth, when I had real crises with this. And up until that age, around 35, 36, I'd managed to, stuff it down, concentrate. It's about Mozart. It's not about you, kind of feeling. But at a certain point, you blossom as an artist, and you want to paint your picture. You don't want to paint someone else's.
Right.
I guess that's the way I'd put it.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how your transition affected your career. Did you expect the kind of backlash from the profession that you got? Did you expect concerts to dry up? I suppose you probably were aware that you were taking a risk, but the way it all played out, was it what you expected?
No, not at all. Before I transitioned, I made a list of 5 very trusted friends to talk to in advance, some of them pretty prominent conductors, all of whom were immediately completely supportive and assured me that everything would go on as normal. And 2 of the most famous of them didn't hire me for 20 years after that point,
Wow.
after having beautiful soul-searching conversations with them.
Wow.
I was furious at the time. I felt backstabbed, but they, of course, are not only responsible to music and to their audience, but also to, administrative staff, to ticket holders, to people who buy the tickets and so forth. And I think it was something that just hadn't been done, and people were really kind of terrified about it. And that surprised me. The terror about it was really strange to me. And I heard that word used a few times. I was teaching at that time. I was a part-time teacher at 3 schools, and one of them fired me. Concerts really dried up in terms of future engagements not coming in. I had a couple of engagements where I had a contract and I got paid not to show up, not to play.
Yeah.
That was kind of amazing. But I think what hurt me the most was people I was depending on. Musical careers are a kind of a nexus, a connection sort of thing. You depend on the conductors who like to work with you. You depend on chamber musicians who like to play with you, concert series that have had you year after year. These were the things that all dried up. People who I thought were friends stopped calling. And it wasn't kind of an insulting thing. It was just sort of like an avoidance kind of thing. I wasn't getting anything. A couple of things kept me going. I was very lucky. I started to play for the Mark Morris Dance Company at that time, and they actually asked me to be their artistic music director before I left New York. So I could have stayed in New York and done that, but it's a very, very low salary, and I love playing with dancers, but not all the time. It wasn't something I really wanted to do. I ended up teaching at a children's music school in Westchester, and I thought that was the kind of job. At the age of 40, I was teaching little kids, and that was the kind of job I expected to do when I was right out of college, 21, 22, and did. So I sort of thought, well, I've set my life back about 20 years, and to some extent that was true. But great fortune smiled upon me in a few years of very dicey years went by, where work was hard to find. But then I auditioned for a job at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And when I moved to Canada, I just hadn't played in Canada. People didn't know me. They knew my name by reputation, but they didn't know what I used to look like or what kind of, persona they perceived I had or should have or whatever. And the dedicated agent I did move to at that time, I changed agents also, was able to get me a fair amount of work in Canada that built over the years. And as I kept playing and playing, and then videos started appearing, people started to hire me in the United States again. And those 2 conductors I mentioned hired me again. So, it's kind of a long road out and back, which, sort of tells maybe the worst story of human beings, that they're, not as adaptable as you might like them to be. On the other hand, if you look at it the positive way, growth and change are possible, and people do certainly change. And I would say also amongst my circle of friends and family that, some problems that I had over the years all of them became better. Even just this past year, a dear, dear friend and marvelous musician called me, and I hadn't talked to him in 20 years, and he said, I really felt bad that we fell out of touch. And I thought, I would have preferred if you said, I'm really sorry for being a jerk all those years ago. But he said the words he was capable of saying.
Right.
And I accepted that, because in a sense, I've grown also. I mean, I've learned a lot about people and about the human animal. And you can't expect from people what they cannot give. You will accept from people what they are able to offer. And, for him, that was going a long, long way. So I said, that's really gracious of you. And we're chatting now again, which is very, very nice. So long road, very interesting road.
That is, I was gonna say, I feel like if I were in your position, the urge to just be angry and to just want to, I don't know, the way that I feel you handled it and the way you just spoke about it was kind of mind blowing to me, at least, about, because it feels like so obvious that you would just want to be mad that people.
Well, you can't build on anger.
Exactly. Yeah, I think
it's a very
that's
poor foundation
right.
For anything. And I will credit my dedicated agent for that as well. I used to really rant and rave at her. I pick up the phone and scream at her about things. And don't be misled, as Bugs Bunny would always mispronounce the word misled. Don't be misled. There have been a couple of occasions where I did read the riot act to a couple of people. I remember once threatening a New York presenter with a lawsuit. They weren't going to give me the concert they had promised anyway, so I figured with nothing to lose, I'm going to tell this person exactly what's coming. And that scared the hell out of them. That was nice.
Oh, man.
But as I said, you have to think ahead. These kind of situations, you always have to think ahead. And there are people who have inspired me greatly over the years, not just musicians and so forth, but politicians as well. And I'll quote from a wonderful speech that Barack Obama recently gave, where he spoke of the need for patience and perseverance. These have been my two guide words for this recent time to get through difficulties. Perseverance is a very, very important concept. You have to keep the long road ahead, keep the long picture in mind. And I'm also at the age where there are these young people following in my footsteps, and I have a certain obligation not to bail out on them, and show them what I think is a good way forward. So there's expectations on my head.
Yeah, it's like young people in the millennial generation tend to assume that music and the arts are open and inclusive, and I think that especially the younger generation sees it as a given, and yet in the classical music world it feels that sometimes that is not the case. I mean, even here in Canton, you played once before your transition and twice after, and there was pushback from patrons about that. So how you spoke about it a little bit, but navigating that, where maybe people do want to hire you, but they're balancing how their community feels it, or how do you broach that conversation maybe with people? That's something for my dedicated agent to mostly handle, and I think she's shielded me from a fair amount of that over the years, for which I guess I have to be thankful. I mean, that's why you have a manager to handle career issues like that. People have mostly not really said those kind of things to my face, which is in a way problematic. I'd rather if people have something offensive and ignorant to say, please, share it. Oh man.
But I've been mostly very buoyed by the young people I meet, because the young generation that we see today, they do not care about color, race, religion, or gender. They're exceedingly fluid on all of these subjects in a way that my generation was not. The generation above me certainly was not, and I'm really, really happy to see that. I mentioned a while back about civil rights and the white and black issues of Baltimore when I was a kid. I have vividly remember so many amazing stories, including one involving my own piano teacher. He was a Filipino man, a rather dark-skinned Asian man from Manila. And I remember coming to my piano lesson. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and he took my mother aside, and he asked her, he said, I really want to ask you an important question. He said, I just came back from South Carolina, this recital I played. I drove down there. When I'm driving back, I stopped at the gas station to use the bathroom, and they had these two signs. One was white and one was black. And he held up his hand. He said to my mother, he says, Libby, I don't know where to go. But he actually, can you imagine being challenged as to what color are you?
Wow.
And there's some sort of law mandating this, Wow. This is within memory of my own lifetime. I like to share that story because I think young people need to know how far they've come in a very short space of time. And that's because of the dedicated hard work of an awful lot of people. So you said one thing that I think is very, I feel incumbent on me to say to young people is that you don't take those things for granted.
Right.
They can easily be taken away.
Right.
And I think you have to live in awareness and a certain amount of fear about that at any given time. Freedom is, people have died for freedom.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So you mentioned your family a couple of times. You just mentioned your mother, Libby, and before we got on the air here, you mentioned your brother, Matthew.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
same name as yours truly here.
Brother, yes, exactly.
How did your family handle your transition?
I give them an F at the beginning and an A at the end. I think that's the best way I would put it. Things were said that were hard to forget. My mother handled it best. She was very resistant at first, but pretty quickly came to understand what the situation was. My brother and father quite a bit slower on the uptake there, but there again, I feel grateful for the lesson there of seeing. I really admire that they learned and changed and grew, and in their own ways. I mean, I mentioned my parents didn't have the benefit of a lot of money, nor even of a college education, but my mother went to college when she was in her 40s and became a lawyer.
Wow. And
my brother's a molecular biochemist, very, very smart scientist. And I think when my brother started to really study transgenderism from a scientific angle, then it was sort of like, he really got it. He's, if we're all Star Trek characters, he's definitely Mr. Spock, and he has to.
I like it.
He has to get it from the scientific angle.
Wow.
But I mean, good for him, because I think an awful lot of people don't seem to understand that being transgender, this is not a choice. And what does send me over the edge when people talk about the transgender preference or lifestyle. They use these kind of words, and this is we're made in so many different ways, just as the creator or a god or a backwards dog or whoever they call that presence creates us. And I mean, rather than get rid of the exotic competition. I mean, when I think about the world of music, if all we ever had to listen to was Beethoven and Chopin, we get very bored of those composers in a hurry. But thank goodness we have Poulenc and Turina, and we have Duschek, and we have Frescobaldi, and that's why music is so wonderful. You turn on the channel, and you always hear something you've never heard before. Well, human beings are kind of like that. Anyway, I kind of digress. It was a learning process for them, right. And it's a very beautiful story actually in my life to see them grow and change, and it made me feel also much more positive about other people's ability to learn and grow and change. And as mentioned, I think people who are under the age of about 30, this is a non-issue. This is nothing for them. So generationally, things improve with that.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot about young people, your work mentoring young people. And I have a question for you about another question related to that and to being transgender in the music world. As a pianist, when you're performing, you're always either the soloist or you're part of a small chamber group. And probably you don't do this much, but of course, maybe you may be playing in the orchestra for Carmina Burana or Sasson Organ Symphony or something like that. But most of the time, you're going to be the center of attention. How does being a transgender pianist and always being the center of attention, how might that differ from, let's say, a violinist who's going to make their career playing in the section of an orchestra and could sort of go through all of this under the radar in a lot of ways?
Well, it makes it hard. Fortunately for me, I don't have to be a team player, and I have a big mouth. So I'm not cut out for that role very well at all. I think perhaps being a soloist, even in my pre-transition days, helped prepare me for, okay, now the spotlight is on you. What does it feel like? You have to become very comfortable with being the center of attention. And that's a kind of an element to being that kind of musician that does have to come very naturally to you. You call it the charisma factor or whatever if you want, that a lot of people are looking at you, you're setting the standard or you're making the big speech, whatever. I remember being astonished many years ago in the pre-internet age when people read books. There was this book called The Book of Lists by, I think it's Walachinsky or something. I used to keep this in my bathroom. It's a perfect bathroom book. I mean, bathroom books can be opened on any page and finished quickly or slowly as desired. And there's this book of, here's this book of lists. So one of the lists is the 10 greatest fears of mankind. So, oh, that's interesting. And I always just, death. And I would think that would be number one. Death is number two. Number one is public speaking.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, public speaking.
It just shocked me to read that. To realize that, really for the vast majority of human beings, the idea of being on a stage and delivering something is more frightening than the prospect of, the fickle finger of fate, saying, time's up, buddy. I'd be much more concerned about number two there, So I remember that when I go on stage, that some people are very terrorized with stage fright or with asserting themselves publicly, and I feel kind of comfortable with that. I love the applause. Every musician does. I love it when people come backstage and say something complimentary of my playing. I love it even more when it's a musician, a fellow colleague, or a musician I really admire will come to hear that and share something with me of that ilk. But I also have I have the added pleasure of, there are times when trans folks come backstage and they give me an embrace and they want to take a photo or whatever, and they say, we're so proud of you being here, or I'm so happy to meet you in person, or something like that. And I feel like I've touched somebody on a even deeper level than even the music can say. I still remember the very first time that happened. I kind of burst out in tears. I was very touched about that, and I realized that I meant something to a certain kind of person that was really, really important. And that as much as I didn't anticipate the negative backlash about career stuff, I also didn't anticipate that kind of thing happening. And I wouldn't say that I necessarily looked forward to that. I never thought of myself as being a social role model, and I had to learn from a couple of LGBT folks who were very professionals in the PR field and really involved, especially in important gay rights issues like AIDS and ACT UP. And I got to know Larry Kramer actually pretty well. People who kind of counseled me on this, that whether you want to be or not, you are. So you gotta do it right. Don't mess it up. And I've gotten old enough. I recently scolded another trans person about something she said or did. I said, "You never do that. No." Called scolding grandma. Yeah. Actually, I got to practice. That's the one where you did that. That's very hard to do.
It is.
No. I have to practice that with a finger.
It's you also mentor people, I think, at the educational level. You teach, we mentioned, at Temple University, and you've also you held faculty positions at Manhattan School of Music, New York University, lots of others. I remember reading on your website that you credit, when you transitioned and you were going through, as you mentioned, those dark couple of years, that if it weren't for a teaching job, you might have become homeless. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that and teaching, and maybe how that experience changed your view on teaching, or if it made you feel differently about it.
I became a much better teacher, hands down, after transition. I had been teaching at a couple of schools in New York, and I felt I was a good teacher. But when I lost one of those jobs, and when money was tight, and as I mentioned, I was teaching in this children's school, and my first reaction to it was, oh my God, look where my life has tumbled to. But I also looked hard in the mirror and I said, when you're served up lemons, you have to make lemonade. And years before, when I had graduated from Juilliard in age 21 or whatever, I remember with the attitude of the diva that I was and great star that I deserved to be, that it was humiliating to be teaching private lessons to 8-year-old children, or to be going to somebody's house to give a lesson. Or my first teaching job was at a 3rd Street Music School settlement downtown on Saturdays. this kind of stuff. And here I was back to doing that at square one. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a good teacher. I'm going to learn how to be a good teacher of children. Because I had not, especially a teacher of children, I had thought it was humiliating. Why should I be doing that? I should be playing with the Berlin Phil every night. You know, what justice would be for me, you know, at that time. And I still tell this is a self-complimentary tale on myself. I remember one of the first students I had at that little Westchester school, this little girl comes in, and she looks every bit like Peppermint Patty out of a Peanut cartoon strip. Her hair's a mess. She's got some dirt on her face because she was playing in the mud, and she, you know, whatever. And she sits down at the piano. And she said, I said, nice to meet you. What was her name? And now suddenly, I always remember her name. And now I'm telling this story, I get the you know, old age block. What it was her name? I forgot. Katie Welch. That's it. I said, Katie, I'm happy to be teaching you. And she sort of like, she stuck her tongue out like that. And then she said, I hate the piano. And, you know, and I realized, you know, parents had probably dropped her off for a little bit of babysitting, you know, whatever, you know. So here I am, you know, former professor teaching this kid. And I said, you know what? I hate the piano too. Sometimes I really hate the piano. And I started to pound it with my fist and say, here, help me out. Let's beat it up, you know. And she loved doing that, you know, until she was exhausted, you know. And I said, but the piano can be very beautiful too. And I started playing Nocturne for her, and she liked that. And a couple of years later, her last lesson, I remember I was teaching her, and these 2 years that had passed, I had really dedicated myself to not teaching music per se, but sharing my love of music with young people. Because in 30 minutes with a young person who may not have any musical talent at all, you're not going to teach them to play a scale really, really well, but you can teach them to really love interaction with the piano and with sharing music with somebody. Anyway, at her last lesson, I remember saying, I have some big news I'm going to tell you. You're going to have a different teacher next year because I'm moving to Canada, to Vancouver. She said, where's Vancouver? And I pointed and drew a little map, and I said, it's all the way over there. I said, it's 3,000 miles away. You know, blah, blah, blah. She burst out crying. I said, why are you crying? What are you crying? What's the matter? She said, because I love the piano.
Oh.
I thought, now I know how to be a good teacher.
Wow.
I mean, you know, I have to say that getting out of the conservatory environment where I was concerned with, you know, how they're going to do in the juries and are they going to win the concerto competition and, you know, competition with the other teachers, but this is and just simply working with children. It was the greatest blessing my pedagogy could ever have had. And although you know, since then I taught in Vancouver and now in Philadelphia, I am teaching high-level people. But, you know, if you don't teach with that kind of level of joy as your foundation, then really what are you teaching? You know, a couple of skill sets, but you're not teaching anything that really has the potential to make a difference in people's lives and also other people's lives, because people love music. They share that with as many people they can. You know, it's a very exponential kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I have to say, this is, you know, one of the greatest blessings of my life was being forced to be a teacher of children. Mm-hmm. It taught me a lot. And I say this to all my graduating students also, because so many of them will be in that situation soon after they get out of college and coping with something that, you know, it's hard to teach pedagogy as a subject. You can teach about books and sources and all, but really meeting young people, really young people, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, week to week, and informing their love of music, the arts, creativity, a whole worldview. That's a different challenge every day, you know, every lesson.
And I can relate directly to that. Part of my job as the associate conductor here at the Canton Symphony is working with the Youth Symphony. And my goal with them, and when I came in, I got a conservatory master of music and conducting. I'm not an educator. I don't have that background. And
okay, kids, Mahler 5?
Almost that bad. Brahms 2. And that was a huge mistake, but I learned from it.
Yeah.
But, you know, the thing that I have just loved about it is that I'm exposing these kids to these great orchestral masterworks for the first time. And at the beginning of this season, which is all online so far, the fall has been all online, I asked each of them to introduce themselves and say what their favorite piece of music was, and orchestral music. I would say 90% of them mentioned a piece that we played in youth orchestra. And it was just the most profound experience. I mean, I did not get into this to work with kids. I got into the business to work with professionals. And it was just such a profound experience to realize that impact that I had had. So I can very much relate to that.
And I think you make an impact as a teacher on an individual level far more than, say, I mean, years ago I gave children's concerts where I play and I talk to them and be an entertainer. But I don't know how much of an impact that really makes. I remember as a child also in public school, once a year they'd take us to the Baltimore Symphony and they'd give a children's concert. Boy, I hated it. They were all, one of those people, they're talking down to me. This is a viola. And I was the one I wanted to run and say, yeah, you don't know how to play it.
Oh my goodness.
There we go, Rachel.
That's my job.
What the children of Canton are thinking as they watch the Kinder concert.
I hope that that's been my goal since getting this job, is figuring out, because I would read scripts from other Kinder concerts, and I always felt, I was like, this feels condescending to children. They're smarter than this. And so
they are. They know what those
they know what they are. They're smart. They're smart. Kids are smart. So that's been a learning experience for me, is how do I actually inform children of things that are going to actually be important. I think we did a good job this year with the
Absolutely.
Kinder concert.
Unquestionably.
So
much of our world still doesn't understand gender dysphoria and what it means to be transgender. And there are even some people who, as you mentioned, believe it's a preference, believe it's a choice, all of these things. How do you enter into conversations about your identity with that population, or maybe do you choose not to?
I think I've been spared that for the most part. I haven't been put in a situation where I've been challenged on it or asked that. And there again, I mean, we were just talking about working with kids one-on-one. I think what really changes people's minds is not an intellectual argument, but when people know someone who is GLBT, there's a lot of different acronyms. I think the longest one is GLBTQIA+.
Yes.
I got everybody there.
Yes.
In recent times, I've had conversations. I don't want to bring up politics here, but conversations about will the Supreme Court reverse itself on various things. And I'm not sure that really can happen. It's one thing to say, I don't believe in gay marriage. I don't believe, trans people and blah, blah, this and that. It's another thing when that gay person is your uncle, when that trans person is your aunt. And America has moved a lot. So it's not like that's some sort of abstract, otherwise entity that I don't know about down the street there. I mean, it's mostly in the smaller towns where maybe that's a lot more rare,
right,
where you have these kind of problems. But in the big cities, my goodness,
right.
I mean, if I take the train up to New York and I'm just walking around Manhattan, I mean, on any given time, I absolutely see people identify as trans walking around. I never used to see that.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, I've been sort of spared that. But if I had to write a book on how to explain it, I think I would just say, well, the best argument I can always think about is to put it in terms of music. I mean, the music is who we are. They were gay composers. There's Samuel Barber and Peter Tchaikovsky, and we hear that in their music because it's a part of their identity. And our identity is not, to a great extent, not chosen. I mean, our foundation is exactly who we are. I mean, if I get flippant about it, I could say to people, and at what age did you decide to be straight? And when did you decide to be Hispanic?
Yeah.
Now, they of course would argue, that's different. It's not the same, but it is the same. It's our identity. It's our oneness as human beings, and it's exactly why. When I was, 3-4 years old and starting to read, one of my favorite books was Madeline by Ludwig Bemelmans, about the little French girl in the 12...
In an old house in Paris that was covered with vines, lived 12 little girls in 2 straight lines.
That's right, and the littlest one was Madeline. Right. Yes, exactly. I remember holding that up. My mother was making a cake in the kitchen. She used to make cakes. Women used to live like Betty Crocker in those days. Mommy, can I have a yellow hat like Madeline's? And she said, no, honey, that's for girls. And I said, but Mommy, I want a yellow hat like Madeline. That doesn't come out of the mouth of somebody who's, choosing, I think I'll choose the transgender lifestyle over the heterosexual.
And, that's the whole thing. It is not easy to be a member of the LGBT community in society. And it's, of course, easier now, but it's not easy. So, of course, why would anyone choose a more difficult path than what they have to in order to function in society?
I'm a little sorry to say, I'm going to lay a lot of this on the media empires and so forth. When's the last, you look at television shows and so forth where gay people like RuPaul are seen as extravagant, fantastical characters leading these glamorous lifestyles of the rich and famous with huge, Hollywood swimming pools out in California or something like that. The reality of that is far from it. And I recall leaving a support group meeting, I don't know, probably around 1995 this was, walking down the street, and I saw, as one always sees in Manhattan, a beggar on the street lying on the sidewalk begging for coin, and I took a double take, and I saw a transgender lady is lying there and dirty and with a cup in her hand, and I thought to myself, this can be me in a year, easily, why not, No, a lot of, especially trans folks, have very difficult lifestyles. We know there are a lot of murders in the trans community as well. And myself, I was the attempted recipient of a date rape incident soon after I transitioned, which opened my eyes a lot to bad things that can happen. But I'm going to be a bit of as a radio, certain things I can't. It's a hard I finish myself, because I gave this advice to a young trans person not too long ago. She had written me an email and was complaining about this and that and this and that. I said, back in the day, this older gay Catholic fellow gave me this advice in a sermon that really inspired me. He said, you can sit and complain that life isn't fair, we don't have our rights and all kinds. I've been discriminated. He said, but you bought a ticket. You bought the ticket of integrity. It's a very expensive ticket. A lot of people don't feel like buying that ticket, and they seem to do all right. But you bought that ticket, and now this is part of the price of the ticket. And I don't mean to diminish anybody's hardships at all, but it is part of it. It is. I've never forgotten that phrase, the price of the ticket. You choose to embrace yourself fully, whether it's straight, gay, lesbian, trans, color, religion, anything that is you, and you decide to live it to the fullest and be a person of integrity, you're going to get people who don't respect it and don't understand it, and problems. And then you have to cope with it, because that is part of the price of the ticket. And realizing, as I did, another story I'll tell is the time I was going to a faculty meeting. I was mid-transition, but I was living in two genders. It was a nightmare. Living this professional life, wearing men's clothing, and going to this faculty meeting and putting on this suit and tie and thinking, my God, this feels like a suit of armor and a mask. And I went to that faculty meeting, and I sat there and I looked at these people in this school that was soon going to decide that I didn't need to be there. And every single one of them was wearing a suit of armor and a mask. And I thought, I'm taking mine off. These people are never, I suddenly feel very sorry for them. A lot of people go through life choosing to let the integrity part go for what? For a house, for a car, for some money in the bank, for social status, for power, for getting along, for fear, I'm starting to sound like a Sunday sermon, but there you are. Mozart didn't have an easy life. Bach did some time in jail. Losers.
Yeah. That you bring up. You bring up so many things that we could talk for probably hours about so many things. And I know we've already been talking for quite a while, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. The issue of the disproportionate amount of the homeless population in America that is LGBTQ, and that issue, especially in homeless youth. I think it's about 40% that identify, and especially the dangers that transgender people face in that arena. That's, it's a whole conversation in and of itself about those issues. And setting that aside, all that is one thing. And then there's also the fact that you chose to you chose to transition. You made that choice, and now you're living your life as a woman. Do you feel that it changed just because you're, now that people can physically see you as a woman? Do you feel like that has affected you at all now that you're living life as a woman as opposed to your life as a male before your transition?
Well, that's a huge conversation opener, because it speaks to gender expectations. And I recall during the time of transition getting plenty of advice. I had a therapist that I had to see, and so forth. And I remember buying a VHS. Remember VHS tapes?
Yeah.
Getting your voice to sound like a woman, and I was watching this thing, and this person is explaining how you have to pitch it higher, and then of course, it was when she got to the part where she said, "Now, women are naturally much more deferential than men, and don't assert themselves too strongly. So when you finish making a statement, turn to your male colleagues and ask them their opinion. Don't finish a question. Don't finish a statement with a period, but add it. That's how I see it. How about you?" That's when I took the tape out and I threw it out the window.
Wow. Wow.
I've been upset about, stuff that goes along with being male my entire life. And now I'm going to throw that out the window and instead take on all this stuff, and
Oh my gosh.
the female education that I've gotten from about the age of, say, about 34 forward, I've been at times terribly appalled at what women are supposed to swallow and digest as this is perfectly fine behavior, young lady. I mean, I'm extending to, by the way, in Canada, I had one incident. I received an email from a male colleague, and he was mad about something I had done or said, whatever, and he sent this email, and he said, you elected to become a woman, now you should effing act like one.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
I would be livid. I'm livid right now just listening to you.
Oh my God.
talk.
That was a rather appalling thing to see. But I took it upon myself to knock on his door a little later in the afternoon. I said, "I'm going to do you a very, very important favor that you're never going to forget. And that is, I'm not going to take your email to the president of this university and have your job taken away. You can thank me later."
Wow. Wow.
I'm not sure that would have happened, but I, of course, wanted to scare him. Because I was as livid as you, maybe even more so.
For sure.
It tells you. I mean, it's really interesting. Trans men, I mean, as women, people who are born female and then transition to male, experience a kind of a rise in status and ability and all the rest of it. And it is just the opposite for men jumping into the female situation. And that's part of this price of the ticket also. I would say something also kind of equally appalling. I mean, I don't think any therapist would say this today, but one of my therapists said to me in a conversation, I said to her, you've been putting this wall between me and starting hormone therapy. Is there anybody that you approve for hormone therapy and reassignment right away? And she said, "Well, yeah, of course." I said, "Well, who gets that?" And she said, "Well, they're losers, they're on drugs, they have nothing, whatever." And I said, but not me. And I said, "I work with my emotions every day of my life. You don't trust how I feel." She said, "Well, but you have so much to lose. You got a life, you got a career."
Wow.
Meaning even, this was a female therapist, by the way, pointing out to me that the acquisitions of a male career were obviously far more valuable than my integrity and happiness as a human being in her eyes. I mean, you can go on with this for many, many hours. I mean, we have a long, long road to go to achieve real gender understanding, parity, equality, etc. in this country as well. Oh well.
Wow. Yeah. I think it's interesting as someone who's lived their entire life as a woman. Some of those things, you just live your life, and the fact that you saying them out loud, I was angry about a lot of things.
Of course.
Oh goodness. Oh
Yeah.
my.
And my experience as a man, of course, for my entire life, I think that I was completely oblivious for many, many years about the difficulties that women experience that men simply don't. I mean, even
Yeah,
things like
they
getting.
they tend to be clues about it. I mean, it's really interesting. I think some of my students often come to me for personal advice because they feel like I have some sort of inside dope that most ladies don't have. You know, like I've been a traitor or a spy for the other side. And there's a little bit of truth to that. I remember one of the most uncomfortable memories of my teenage years was being in high school gym class, and you come in from, oh my God, you know, and sports were, listen, don't let my love of Philadelphia Eagles football fool you. I hated gym class. I hated the gym teacher. I hated every single moment of it, you know. And listening to these 14 and 15-year-old boys talk about the party they had gone to and what they had done with this girl or that girl, and the way they would refer to women, young women, and their bodies was so horrifying. And it's a kind of training, you know. It's kind of a school bully, you know, club. You know, to fit in, you're going to boast about this, and you're going to talk in a certain way, and that's how you get in. You know, so even to the point where, you know, grown men, you can talk about, well, I didn't mean that. That's just locker room talk. Well, why is locker room talk never about Raphael and his frescoes?
Wouldn't that be something? Wow.
You know, and I want to say, by the way, I played the piano at the New York Mets LGBT night, Pride night, a few years ago, and then a big LGBT organization gave a big check or the Mets gave a check to this organization. I was on the field for a little bit, and this player, Jerry Blevins, the relief pitcher, who's like 20 feet tall, comes up to me and he says, I loved your playing. He says, you know, my favorite composer is Mozart. I like Eine kleine Nachtmusik. And I was like bowled over. I was like blown away. You know, who knew? You know, and I thought, boy, the world has changed. You know, like, you know, they all like rock music and, you know, whatever, right? And this guy took the time and trouble to say to me that, hey, you know, he like, you know, here's this piece that he knows and he likes.
Oh wow.
And I was so touched by that. That's you know, so I mean, just because you like, and I really do love baseball, just because you like, you know, but this is something that, you know, as I made that gender transition, you know, I mean, I gave up a lot of things that later I just re-embraced. It's like, well, why do I have to give that up? Because that's considered male. I like that. I like going to baseball games. I like smoking a cigar sometimes. George Sand did too. I think, you know, huh?
Wow.
Anyway.
That is so heartwarming that Jerry Blevins likes Mozart.
Man.
That's really cool to me.
I wish he was a better pitcher, but that's okay. Yeah.
I remember him. I'm a Cincinnati Reds fan. I feel like I remember him pitching against us. I know that name. I certainly know that name.
Yeah, I was kind of like blown away, you know, that yeah, you can find a few baseball players actually know a few things about culture. They don't all have to be, you know, uneducated, slobbering jocks, you know. It's not a requirement for the job. You know, you don't have to scratch your crotch and spit tobacco.
There we go.
Wow.
That's in the job resume, the description. You know, I would love to see someone draw up a professional prospectus, you know, for baseball player. Must be, you know, anyway, moving on.
So, moving on a little bit, as from our conversation about your experience as a transgender person in the world of music, in general, we're going through a historic experience with the COVID-19 pandemic right now. And even before that, a lot of changes had been going on in the orchestral music field. The audiences aging, and the orchestra is constantly looking for new ways to attract audiences. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic arrived.
Right.
Where do you see the orchestral industry today, and where do you see it going in the future?
Well, I mean, there are profound changes in life, so much owing to technology primarily. And on the one hand, those of us who have a very traditional view of classical music are, you know, sort of terrified out of our minds. Oh my God, the audience is all aging and dying, and there's nothing to replace it. But in fact, I think more young people are watching and listening to classical music than ever before. They're just not doing it at a live concert. They're flipping on YouTube and watching 5 to 10 minutes of something that they find really interesting.
Mm.
And then they flick to something else that might be country western or rock or indie or whatever. Their sense of music is far more cosmopolitan than that. And the fact of COVID can be something very, very positive for the orchestras to embrace in terms of programming away from everything's always, we'll have the overture, the concerto, and then the symphony to finish up, to let's have, a string quartet. And then we'll have a big brass fanfare, then we'll have a little dance piece, and then we'll have, whatever, the symphony at the end or something like that. I myself, I had to fight like hell with this presenter in New York for a recital I gave about 3 years ago. And the centerpiece of the program for me was this work for piano and dancer. And she absolutely the presenter was adamantly opposed to it. She said, no, it's a solo recital. You can't have a dancer on there. And I said, that's what's really going to make the recital. And I argued and fought and fought and fought and fought. And then I threatened to not play at all. And that's when she gave in. And then when it was done, she said, I'm so glad you talked me into the dancer. That was the center of the program. It's like, duh, don't trust me on that. Bold steps are certainly required in terms of what are you doing as a program. And I see that, I feel like the diversity that is perhaps being foisted on people now as a result of BLM and Me Too and et cetera is a really, really positive step. I myself, I recently read Alex Ross wrote this column in the New Yorker magazine, and he mentioned about 4 or 5 Black American composers. And I was sitting there saying, yeah, well, you mentioned this one and this one, but you forgot this one, this one, this one, this one. I have so many others that just have not been played. The conservative streak of programming has been a blot on the classical industry for decades. I mean, it's long overdue to expand the repertoire that orchestras play. I think that's one part of the puzzle that needs to be done.
Right.
I think identifying the audience is also terribly, terribly important. I never understood why, neighborhoods with huge Hispanic populations, such as New York, why doesn't the Philharmonic go up to the Bronx and play all Dominican programs for the people up there? I mean, there's huge Dominican and Puerto Rican populations up there. And there's an incredible trove of music like that. I myself have played a recital in Hostos College in the southern part of the Grand Concourse, and I gave an all-Hispanic program with a lot of Puerto Rican piano pieces. And some of the ladies that came back afterwards, they were so grateful. They said, yeah, none of our young people know those composers anymore. It's really important that people like you play it. Well, yeah, hello. I mean, you have to.
Right.
I mean, that's a sort of de rigueur. So I don't know why would I go to Hostos College and play an all Beethoven program? What am I attempting to do?
Right.
Who are you connecting with? How are you talking to people? It's like going to Spain. I don't know any Spanish, but I'm going to have a great time. Not really.
Yeah.
If you hablar just un poquito, you'll have a much more fun time. I should say. But COVID, I mean, itself is such a huge blot on so many things, and I mean, I promise not to get any political discussions, and we need to go 360 from the way we're handling this. And my spouse is Japanese, and we spent a lot of time in Japan, and I saw they had, I think over the last 2 weeks, they've had 100 people died from COVID. Compare that with what we're dealing with here. We have to embrace the mask as a patriotic act, and we have to care about each other and stop thinking about what's good for me. COVID is a real challenge in terms of, do we think of ourselves as the United States of America where we all care about our neighbor, regardless of what our neighbor's color, skin, religious or political affiliation is, or whatever? Do we care? So that in itself makes for an atmosphere for great music if we can channel it, I'd say.
I think to finish off our conversation today, we call this podcast Orchestrating Change because we realize that change needs to be done. We need to do things. And so from your perspective, what do you think organizations like the Canton Symphony and us as individuals could take to orchestrate change that we see on stage, in our audience, but then also just being specific to your experience to be better allies and to highlight that experience and the LGBTQ experience and really be the best proponents for change that we can be?
Well, Oh my God, you asked me. These are. If I answer this question, well, I want a job as the new executive director.
We'll talk to Michelle.
Actually, no, I don't want that job. That's a very, very hard job. I mean, because what comes to mind is sort of metaphorically what I was saying a little while ago about how do we educate kids about music. Mm-hmm. Probably not from a concert stage. I think as a social service organization, I think you go to where people are and you bring the music to them, whether it's in their schools, it's in their hospitals, it's in their homes, it's in their place of work. I mean, if I were running my own, Buechner Symphony Orchestra, I know I would have trios and string quartets and brass quintets and percussion ensembles galore, little packets of people, and sending them out like good humor ice cream trucks everywhere. Come hear the glory of this stuff. Hey, we'll talk to you about this. You want to see what this is? Let's listen to this today. Hey, this is kind of fun. This is cool. Education always happens in the schools, and if our schools have not done what they really can and should in terms of arts education, then I think we have to be prepared to go into the schools and do that. And, it's a little bit of a problem for those of us with a traditional conservatory education, as I've alluded to. For me, the first time I had to teach a 6-year-old how to play the piano, my God, I was stunned, I was horrified, I was stupefied, I didn't know what I was doing, Now somebody says, I want you to go and play for an audience of 4 and 5-year-olds. And say, great, where is it? Let's have some fun. Let's go and do it. You have to have that perspective, and I think that mentality and that willingness to do it. Because if that artistry, if that creativity is as important to the human animal as nutrition, basic nutrition, as in learning to read and learning to write and to add and so forth, then we have to approach it that way. This is mother's milk. We all need it. It enhances our lives. It gives meaning to our lives. It can change. It absolutely can change your perspective on many, many things. One of the things I took away from a few years during my transition, I lived mostly in the Bronx in New York City in a pretty rundown neighborhood. And I was always so touched. I would go to the little Catholic church across the street. I knew the gal who was leading the children's choir. And I looked at those little kids, and I thought every single one of those kids who's holding a music book today is not holding a gun or an injection needle or a vial of cocaine. Those kids are holding creativity in their hands this Sunday and learning what that's all about. Similarly, in some of the school orchestras, they're holding a violin, they're holding a flute. They don't want to hold a gun. They can do such magical things with those instruments, And if every kid in the Bronx was holding one of those things, well, we'd have a very different Bronx, and we'd probably have a very different United States of America too. I will say politically, here's one thing I will say is that I'm a very, very anti-gun person. I always have been, but I don't get angry at people who collect and treasure their guns and so forth. I feel saddened. You can't make music with a gun, but you can with a violin.
Yeah.
They should try that. Hold it. I bet they wouldn't want that gun so much anymore. Wow. That's okay. That's my political story.
Amazing.
Well, Sara, it has been an absolute privilege to speak with you this morning. It was truly an honor. Yeah. And I feel so moved by the conversation that we have just had, and hopefully our listeners will as well. If you have any parting thoughts for us before we let you go.
Oh, not a lot, except I'm certainly looking forward to being with you all again. I can't wait to go to Canton again, as I said, not only to play the orchestra, but to see that Football Hall of Fame, which I've never seen. But I think especially to be making music with Gerhardt, that he is one of the greatest conductors I've ever worked with. He's also has a heart as wide as the Pacific Ocean. He's a very, very wonderful man, and he has his own, really amazing life story to share with you. And I think we've also connected on that level on a few times, few conversations. I just adore that man in every possible way, and I adore the orchestra. So let's hope that times improve soon and get better, and we're all able to be having this conversation in person once again, ASAP, and getting down to the really important work of giving voice to Mozart and making that heard by as many people as possible.
Well, I can promise you, if I am still around when you are next a soloist with the Canton Symphony Orchestra, I will personally attend the Pro Football Hall of Fame with you.
Oh, well, my goodness. Okay, there we can lay a wreath at the picture of Nick Foles.
Oh, I hope there aren't any of those in there quite yet.
Oh, no.
2 words, Philly special. Oh, boy.
Well,
no, we don't want to end with that. Peace, pace. Can we all get along, please?
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Sara Beuchner is a world-renowned pianist who has appeared as a soloist with the Canton Symphony Orchestra 3 times and hopefully many more once we get out of the pandemic. Sara, thank you again for talking with us today.
Thank you all so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
all the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
The Erie Philharmonic continues its journey around the musical world with another free broadcasted concert. Delve into the Russian soul with Tchaikovsky, Prokofiev, Stravinsky, and more alongside the music from contemporary composer Lyra Auerbach. You can check out the concert for free on Thursday, January 24th at 8 p.m. or Sunday, January 24th at 2 p.m. and on the Erie Philharmonic's Facebook page or online at wqln.org/EriePhil. Orchestrating Change is a production of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
Our theme music was composed by Eric Gould and performed by Derek Snyder and Tim Adams.
Our audio engineer is Nathan Maslick.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.